The next item in front of us, which is the first and only bill we have up for us for consideration, is sponsored by myself, and it is an act related to state affairs and government, the 2021 Act on Climate. This bill establishes statewide greenhouse gas emission reduction mandate, and as many of the members on the committee and members of the public know, I have been introducing this legislation since I was sworn in 2017. I represent coastal communities of Jamestown and Newport, and we are really on the front lines of the impacts of climate change. We are seeing the impacts from more frequent and intense storms, sea level rise, flooding, and I think Rhode Island as a whole, we are especially vulnerable to the impacts of climate. So really what the Act on Climate is intended to do is take the carbon reduction targets that were established in the 2014 Resilient Rhode Island Act, which was sponsored by Senator Conley, and really take those carbon targets and update them, and also set them, make them mandatory and enforceable. There's also aspects to include planning, because really this is about taking action. So while we need the carbon reduction targets to be mandatory and enforceable, we also need to make sure that our state is planning to take this action. And so, Rhode Island is a leader on energy efficiency. We are a leader in offshore wind. These are just some of the tools that we need to move forward to get to our net zero goals. And so, this is really just a bill intended to make sure that Rhode Island is taking and continuing to show strong leadership in the efforts to combat the climate crisis. And with that, I will entertain any questions from the committee. I will also tell you that the first person that we will have up for testimony is Amy Moses from the Conservation Law Foundation, and she can also help answer any technical or legal questions. But I'm happy to entertain any questions or comments from the committee at this time. Hello, Amy, are you there?
I'm here, thank you.
Thank you for joining us tonight. You are in front of the committee. I would ask that you try to keep your remarks brief, but as you are serving as a technical expert, I know that you have a lot of ground to cover. So, and whenever you're ready, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chairperson Oyer and members of the committee, for the opportunity to testify in support of this critically important legislation, Senate Bill 78. My name is Amy Moses. I'm the Vice President and Rhode Island Director at Conservation Law Foundation, an environmental advocacy group working throughout New England for over 50 years. This bill is our #1 top priority. We are grateful to Chairperson Oyer for her leadership and persistence, as she just mentioned, in addressing the climate crisis. Thank you also to Senate leadership and members of this committee for co-sponsoring the Act on Climate bill. As we heard from the chair, climate change is here, and it is only going to get worse. Rhode Island has not passed comprehensive climate legislation since the Resilient Rhode Island Act back in 2014. That act set up some structures and aspirational goals. Now is the time to update it and to get to work reducing our climate-damaging emissions. The climate crisis is an all-hands-on-deck emergency. We've got to tackle it at all levels of government and in all 3 branches of government. Thankfully, our new president is re-engaging with the Paris Climate Accord, giving our country a seat at the table internationally. The president is also making climate a top priority for his administration, emphasizing climate and equity at the national level. Here in Rhode Island, you, the members of this committee, you have the opportunity to make sure the ocean state is doing its part by passing this bill. Chairperson Oyer has been working on this bill for several years. I want to commend her for her time and energy listening to environmental advocates, folks in government, labor unions, and many others. She has taken a lot of input and turned it into positive changes in the bill that is before you today. The Act on Climate bill is the foundation for many other climate bills you may hear this legislative session. I want to emphasize it. This puts in place a solid foundation for emissions reductions throughout the entire economy. Other bills you'll hear later on may focus on things like pathways for emission reduction in specific sectors. Those bills build upon this one, and we've got to have a strong foundation to make everything work together. Currently, how the system works at a high level is we have a governing body called the EC4, the Executive Climate Change Coordinating Council. The EC4, by statute, had to come up with one emissions reductions plan to reach aspirational goals. We've got some goals right now for 2035 and 2050. Turning to the Act on Climate bill before you, I'm going to highlight several key features that are based on the work done by Chairperson Oyer, particularly over the last year. First, this bill is based on science. The current aspirational goals on the books are outdated and insufficient. This bill updates those so we reach net zero emissions by 2050. This is consistent with the Paris Accord and our neighbor in Massachusetts. Second, this bill provides transparency into how the state is tackling our emissions reductions in several ways. I'm just going to highlight a few. The bill includes emissions reductions targets for the years 2030 and 2040, as well as 2050. Under the law currently on the books, we'd have to wait till 2035. So by having 2030 and 24 goals, this gets us on track sooner, and we do not have to wait 14 years to find out how we are doing. The bill requires that we actually do reach these emissions reductions targets. They are mandatory. The goals on the books right now are just aspirational. The bill also requires an update to the original emissions reductions plan by the end of 2025, and then updates to that plan every 5 years. Right now, there is just one plan to get us all the way to 2050. Imagine having only one budget for 30 years. It just doesn't make sense. Updating the plan every 5 years with targets every 10 years will keep us on track. So we've got science and transparency, and I'm going to mention two more key improvements. Next one is equity. There's equity in this bill by addressing environmental justice communities and providing for a just transition. Communities are impacted differently by the climate crisis, and those who do the least harm often bear the brunt of the worst impacts while having fewer resources to address these challenges. The emissions reductions plans that I just mentioned, one in 2025 and then updates every 5 years, those plans will include an equitable transition for environmental justice populations, as well as a process for the environmental justice communities to provide input on the plans. In addition, the emissions reductions plans will identify support for workers in the transition, including the development of programs to recruit, train, and retain people who are underrepresented in the economy in clean energy jobs with wages and benefits consistent with area wage and labor standards. Finally, there is accountability in this bill. It makes the state greenhouse gas emission reductions targets legally binding and enforceable. This key provision makes addressing the climate crisis an endeavor of all three branches of our government. As you know, you, the legislature, pass the law, and the executive branch gets to work implementing the law. Now, if they fall short, the judicial branch can enforce the law, ordering the state to comply with it. Climate change is an all-hands-on-deck emergency. This bill takes it seriously with science, transparency, equity, and accountability. It provides a solid foundation from which we can work to reduce our climate-damaging emissions. Americans and Rhode Islanders want action on climate. Polls show Americans want their government to do more to address the climate crisis. Here in Rhode Island, a poll reported in the Boston Globe found that climate was a top issue for Rhode Islanders just after COVID. We've got action happening at the international and national levels. With this bill, Rhode Island, all three branches of Rhode Island's government, can do their part in addressing the climate crisis. Rhode Island has not taken meaningful action on climate in a long time. There have been studies and there have been reports, but there has been a lack of meaningful action. Rhode Island needs to step it up, or we are going to be left behind. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Moses. Are there any questions for this witness? Okay, hearing none, we are, thank you for your time, Amy, tonight, and appreciate all of the work you've put in as well on this legislation. So we are going to move on to our next member of public testimony. Leanne, are you there?
I am. Thanks, Chair Oyer and members of the committee. Happy to get started.
Yeah, please go ahead and introduce yourself for the committee.
Sure. This is Leanne Byrne. I'm Deputy Chief of Staff for Treasurer Seth Magaziner. He apologizes that he couldn't join today, but you should have a letter from him in your materials. And I'm proud to be here on his behalf to support the 2021 Act on Climate bill. This legislation sets a goal of transitioning Rhode Island's economy to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. In doing so, Rhode Island can create good jobs, become more resilient to climate change, solidify our leadership in clean energy, improve our industrial competitiveness, and positively benefit the health of all Rhode Islanders. The Treasurer's focus is on promoting economic growth and job creation. Rhode Island has a major opportunity to put thousands of people to work by transitioning to a green economy. Our team is proud of the green infrastructure finance program we developed at the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank. They have invested $145 million in alternative energy and energy efficiency projects across the state, supporting more than 2,000 jobs. This while helping municipalities, taxpayers, small businesses, and nonprofits save money on their energy bills and reducing reliance on fossil fuels. We can and must build on this progress by setting ambitious and actionable goals, like those in the Act on Climate bill. To ensure a just transition, it is vital that the jobs created pay wages and benefits consistent with or that exceed area wage and labor standards. We must invest in workforce development that recruits, trains, and retains members of environmental justice communities. And we urge the support of this committee to promote these ambitious goals. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Leanne. I appreciate you coming on to testify tonight, and I appreciate Treasurer Magaziner's support. He has been a great asset in helping draft this legislation and also standing in strong support of taking action on climate. Do any of the members have questions for this witness? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Leanne. And hearing none, we will move on to our next witness. And so Priscilla De La Cruz from the Green Energy Consumer Alliance, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. If you want to go ahead with your testimony.
Great, happy to do so. Good evening. My name is Priscilla De La Cruz, President of the Environment Council of Rhode Island, also known as ECRI, and I am also the Rhode Island Director at Green Energy Consumers Alliance. My testimony today is on behalf of ECRI. First, thank you, Chairwoman Senator Dawn Oyer, for your leadership on the 2021 Act on Climate, as well as fellow co-sponsors. And members of the committee, I really appreciate your time and the opportunity today to testify in support of this critical and necessary bill. This year, ECRI celebrates 50 years of developing and advocating policies and laws that protect and enhance the environment. The coalition is comprised of 70 organizations and individuals representing more than 50,000 Rhode Islanders. Last year, ECRI launched the Climate Crisis Campaign with the support of 29 organizations and businesses across different sectors, and chose to endorse one legislative priority, that is the Act on Climate bill. At the start of last year's session, we did not foresee the pandemic on the horizon as we worked to mobilize Rhode Islanders around climate action. Last fall, the COVID-19 Consortium for Understanding the Public's Policy Preferences across states found that Rhode Island voters consider climate change as the second most important problem facing the country, with COVID-19 as the first. The climate crisis is here, along with the inequities that have been exacerbated by the pandemic, especially in frontline communities, Black, Indigenous, and people of color and low-income communities who are disproportionately overburdened by the impacts of climate change and pollution. We must take climate action. As a concerned advocate, a concerned Rhode Islander, and a concerned Latina who grew up in a low-income household, experiencing and witnessing the impacts of climate and economic injustice, I truly urge all committee members to support climate action. And ECRI urges you to vote this bill out of committee for a vote on the Senate floor. We look forward to working with members of this committee and your colleagues to pass the 2021 Act on Climate bill this session. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Does anyone have any questions for this witness? Okay, thank you. Thank you for your testimony, Priscilla. And we will call our next witness, and I believe we're being joined by Patrick Crowley from the Rhode Island AFL-CIO.
Good evening, Chairperson Oyer. Am I audible?
You are on. We can hear you. Go ahead with your testimony.
Thank you very much. Madam Chairperson, members of the committee, my name is Patrick Crowley, and I am the Secretary-Treasurer of the Rhode Island AFL-CIO. On behalf of the 80,000 working men and women who are members of the affiliated unions of our organization, I am here today to speak in support of this important piece of legislation. I am also testifying on behalf of the 12,000 members of NEA Rhode Island, where I also serve as the Government Relations Director. Just recently, the labor movement in Rhode Island joined forces with a growing number of allies in the environmental movement in support of developing a just transition to a net zero emission economy. We created Climate Jobs Rhode Island to make sure not only does Rhode Island set and meet the goals expressed in this bill, but that we do so in a just and enforceable way. We believe as a labor movement that we need to institutionalize the idea of a just transition that prioritizes solutions developed by underserved communities overburdened by pollution and to follow the lead of frontline communities while maximizing family-sustaining job growth through the creation, maintenance of good-paying, well-benefited union jobs. And those jobs need to be included with apprenticeship programs. We believe the text of this bill will do just that. I'd invite the members of the committee and the public to learn more about Climate Jobs Rhode Island by visiting our website, climatejobsri.org. And I'm proud to be following my co-chair in that effort, Priscilla De La Cruz from Green Energy Consumers Alliance. It's an honor to be testifying alongside with her and so many other strong advocates for this bill. With that, I know you have a busy evening, so I'll stop there, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Pat. Does anyone have any questions for this witness? I just wanted to express my appreciation to you. I know how much work that you have done to help get the Climate Jobs RI Coalition moving forward, and so I look forward to continuing working with you and all of your members on this very important issue. And have a great night.
Thank you. On behalf of President George Nee and the entire AFL-CIO, thank you for your efforts.
Thank you. And we will move on to our next witness. And I believe we're being joined by Meg Kerr from the Audubon Society of Rhode Island. Meg, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
I absolutely can. If you want to go ahead with your testimony.
Thank you very much. The Audubon Society of Rhode Island supports S78, the Act on Climate 2021 bill, and we thank Chairwoman Oyer and many of the members of this committee for supporting this important bill. This legislation, I wanted to direct my testimony to Audubon's members. We have 17,000 members and supporters, and as you probably know, what Audubon members care most about is birds. Audubon was founded in 1897 by people who really were concerned about the unregulated slaughter of birds for their feathers. Today, we are concerned because birds are disappearing from the skies all around the world at a rate that shocks our scientific ornithologists. Since the 1970s, our continent has lost 3 billion birds, nearly 30% of the total. And if you talk to our local ornithologists, that national trend is happening here in Rhode Island. Even common birds like sparrows and blackbirds are in decline due to climate change and other human-caused environmental disruptions. So our members are deeply, deeply concerned about climate change. So over the past year, as the pandemic was winding up, Audubon was winding down our new strategic plan that was adopted by our board in June of 2020. The plan covers the years 2020 to 25, and it was developed with input from almost 60 key informants around the state, including elected officials, environmental colleagues, state and local government partners, funders, and of course, Audubon members and volunteers. Everybody we interviewed, when we asked what Audubon should be working on, all they wanted us to work on was the climate crisis. And many of the people were concerned that Rhode Island government was not acting with sufficient urgency around acting on climate. The completed plan that was approved in June specifically charges us to, quote, hold Rhode Island's regulatory and legislative leadership accountable for implementing plans that support our climate goals, end quote. Passing this bill, which I hope you will do, with its science-based enforceable greenhouse gas reduction targets, is a critical first step toward that charge that we have been given by our board. The third thing I want to mention is that when we talk to our members, they care about what the state is doing to address climate change. And it's pretty opaque. Our members really rely on professional staff to interpret and explain how the state is progressing on climate change. And if we're going to be successful, if we're going to build a movement to address climate, we need to open this conversation and make it accessible to everyone in the state. We need to be sure that state agencies are efficiently working together to take bold action. And so we are really excited about the transparency parts of the bill, that it's requiring plans to be issued every 5 years. The plans must address input from the advisory committees that were created to support the Executive Climate Change Coordinating Council, or EC4. And finally, the EC4 is required to develop and display public metrics to make what's happening understandable to everyone, including Audubon's members. And finally, our members demand action. Act on Climate 2021 builds from our current strengths and relies on current law, the Resilient Rhode Island Act. It does not create a new state bureaucracy. It's not prescriptive, directing state agencies how to reach the greenhouse gas reduction targets. It allows our agencies to utilize their expertise and their professional staff and allows them to adjust the strategies as new tools and information is available. It's not a complex bill. It's short and easily understood by decision makers and the public. Addressing climate change is Audubon's top priority, and we stand ready to work with you all on this committee and other legislators, state agencies, and the public on this critical issue. And thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Meg. I appreciate all of your work and all of the Audubon Society's work on this and so many important issues. And thank you for giving us that additional context, because I think the bird loss is something that folks may not necessarily connect right away with the impacts of climate change, but I think it's really critically important about how our ecosystem is all connected. Are there any members of the committee who would like to ask any questions of this witness? Okay, hearing none. Thank you, Meg. Appreciate your time tonight. And we are moving on to our next public testimony, which is actually our colleague and Senator Tierra Mack. Senator.
Hi, Chairperson.
Hi, Senator. Thank you for joining us. Go ahead with your testimony.
Awesome. Glad to be here, and thank you for sponsoring this important legislation. I've gotten numerous emails this week and last week from constituents who are eager for our state to start tackling the climate crisis. And I know this is one of the first steps that we need to do, but it's not the last step. We know that climate change does not just impact, it impacts everyone in our communities, but it also disproportionately impacts Black and Brown frontline communities. With this bill, we have to make sure that in the 7 years of this target, we simply cannot wait for meaningful action for our frontline communities with Black and Brown communities who are taking the brunt of climate inaction. We need to make sure that any of the green policies and emissions that we are cutting are being conscious of the historically marginalized communities that are directly impacted. And I'm excited to stand with other members of the chamber in the Senate and the House to introduce legislation that is putting Black and Brown frontline communities and Indigenous communities first in the form of green justice zones, foods, and affordable housing that all address some of these metrics that we can make sure we are achieving within the next 5 to 7 years so that we can make headway on this climate crisis that we're facing. And again, thank you so much for sponsoring this, and I am in full support of Senate Bill 78.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments, Senator, and look forward to working with you on all of these issues. Are there any questions or comments for Senator Mack? All right. Thank you, Senator.
Thanks.
And with that, we have our next witness, which is also our colleague, Senator Kendra Anderson. Senator, welcome to the committee. You can go ahead with your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. When this bill first was released last week, I think I heard a collective cheer from the environmental community and climate activists. It's very exciting, and all your work has been amazing, and I thank you for that, and all the organizations and activists that have worked on getting us to this point. I'm not going to say much. Many people are speaking, and I reiterate things that Amy Moses said, that we would be accountable for emissions reductions, that this is based on science, and all those things are wonderful. The equity portion of the bill, I agree with Patrick Crowley that we need to follow the lead of frontline communities. And I'm not sure the bill stipulates that in detail. It's sort of perfunctory language with jobs and frontline and environmental justice. But I know everyone is moving in the right direction. The one question I did have was the change in the timeline's wonderful. The new timeline for reaching these goals and these targets being readjusted was great. But I was wondering about the timeline for the plan. The last bill last year, the plan was due in December, the last day of 2021, and now it's the last day of 2025. And that's just the only question I have with the bill. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate your testimony, and I will be happy to have further discussions with you about the plan and the timing of it. In fact, I do also want to raise the Department of Environmental Management also weighed in support on this legislation with some concerns with some of the drafting. Some of the plan language is new on the bill, and so it does deserve more attention, and there will be more attention paid to it. And so this is, the reason that we have hearings is to make sure that we can get that input from the public and from other experts. And so I appreciate you raising that concern and look forward to the future conversations we will have on that specific item. Are there any questions or comments for this witness? Okay, with that, thank you, Senator Anderson. Appreciate you being here tonight.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And we're going to try to maybe hear one or two more witnesses before we break and in due course and respect for the governor. But I do believe that we have Paul Marshall on the phone. Paul, are you there?
I am.
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you so much for being here. If you want to go ahead with your testimony.
Yes, thank you for the time. Again, my name is Paul Marshall. I'm a current resident and homeowner in Newport, Rhode Island. I first want to thank you for allowing me to speak tonight, and I also want to applaud Senator Ewart for bringing a science-driven, job-focused, equitable, and transparent climate bill to the floor. While I'm here today as an ordinary Rhode Island citizen, I'd like it to be known that I'm actively involved in both local and state issues as it pertains to mobility, accessibility, climate, and equity. I own my own social impact firm that focuses on helping businesses with these areas, and I've seen firsthand the impact climate change has had on these industries that are important for Rhode Islanders: manufacturing, tourism, technology. I'm also a new father, and it is a personal mission of mine to help and leave this world, my community, a better, cleaner, sustainable, and more equitable place. With that said, I stand before you today to voice to the fullest extent my support for this bill. As you know, this bill establishes statewide greenhouse gas emission reductions in line with science, all while encouraging job and economic growth. This is what Rhode Island needs to be a viable economic competitor in our region. Also extremely comforting to know that we can execute these standards through an equitable, just, and transparent lens. I appreciate your time and consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate you being on today, and I always appreciate my constituents coming in. And I know you and I have talked about this legislation and how the state can best address the climate crisis. So I appreciate your input as a new father and as a business person. So thank you for that. Do any members of the committee have any questions or comments for Paul? Okay, hearing none. Thank you, Paul. Have a great night.
Thank you. Bye.
And we will take, I believe, our final witness before I will ask for a motion to recess. And I believe we have Jonathan Burrard from Rhode Island Clean Water Action with us.
Yes, hello. Thank you, Chair Oyer. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine. Thank you for being here. Go ahead with your testimony.
Excellent. So again, thank you, Chair Oyer and members of the committee. My name is John Burrard, and I am the Rhode Island State Director at Clean Water Action. I speak today on behalf of our nearly 20,000 members here in Rhode Island. Clean Water Action supports S78 and urges the committee to swiftly pass this critical legislation before we as a state lose any more time to address the climate crisis. Those of you familiar with our organization know that our field canvass goes out every single day, rain, sun, or snow, to speak directly with Rhode Islanders about the issues most important for them. For the last several years, when we've done this, spoken to members at their doors, we hear that they are most concerned about the effects that climate change will have on them and their families. When we speak to people in Narragansett, Newport, and Middletown, they tell us how worried they are about sea level rise and about salt water affecting their drinking water. When we speak to people in Cranston and Providence, they worry about how rising temperatures will impact the health of family members that are elderly or have asthma or other health issues. Since we're in the midst of a pandemic, we can't knock doors as we usually do, but we are still calling our members on the phone to check in with them. And we are hearing the same exact things about the climate crisis, except now with a new sense of urgency. The coronavirus pandemic has exposed how lack of preparation has resulted in a public health catastrophe. We knew a pandemic was coming. We didn't know what it would be or when, but we did little to prepare for one. We know the worst effects of the climate crisis is coming, and that the crisis itself is already here. And we are a little behind in our preparations. So the single most important step we can take is to pass this bill and set in motion the sequence of policies and programs that are necessary to protect our resources, our economy, and most importantly, our people from the worst effects of the climate crisis. So thank you again, Chair Oyer, for your years of leadership on this issue and your perennial sponsorship of the bill. I thank the committee for your time tonight, and I urge swift passage. Happy to answer any questions if anyone has them.
Thank you, John. I think it's especially compelling to know how many people in the public understand that this is a really urgent issue and want us to take action. And I know that the work that you do doing direct communication with folks across the state and through your organization across the country is really important to hear, for us to hear that feedback too. Are there any members of the committee who have questions for this witness? Okay, hearing none. Thank you, John. Have a great night. We are now going to, thank you, Senator Coyne, or Chairwoman Coyne pointed out that we actually do not have to formally recess, but that we can stand at ease. And so everyone who is watching, waiting to testify, or just watching along to the committee, we are going to stand at ease until the end of the governor's remarks, and then we will reconvene after the governor completes. So I look forward to everyone rejoining us shortly, and the Committee on Environment and Agriculture is now at ease.